us on to looking at this book here, which perhaps we can start to do. And I just want to first of all check with everybody that you're happy with the way we're going to conduct the session. Everybody, I assume, is muted, and if you want to speak or ask a question, please just put something in the chat or put the hand up signal if you can do that. It's going to be more of a conversation than anything else, certainly not a lecture. And, you know, please feel free to ask a question at any time. What I'd like to do is to, first of all, introduce the book myself by telling you something about it, just giving you an overview of the chapters and the main impression. Then introduce both Jennifer and Yusuf. Jennifer, who is one of the editors of the book, and Yusuf, who's one of the contributors. And I'd just like to say that I'm not sort of just faking this to say that I was really, you know, moved by the book. I really was. What it does is to let us see the scope of the oppression, and also to quote from the book, from one of the contributors, to see people's light in Gaza's darkness. And I think this uneasy balance of positive and negative feelings is our way of being with the people of Gaza. That's something you can pick up overall from the book, as well as just learning to be with the people of Gaza. To quote from the book again, we are blending happiness and sorrow. We're juxtaposing, the book juxtaposes detailed examples of suffering with inspiring examples of what I like to call imaginative defiance. It's a kind of attitude that says, I'm not putting up with this. And I'm just going to give you 4 lines of a short poem, which is in the book, which kind of sums all that up. It says, despite tearing up over killing my olive tree, I still hold the tears to water another tree. If you get that, you've got the feeling.
Yeah.
The first section deals with storytelling, and the writer talks about how he uses stories to distract, soothe, and educate his children. He wants to build a sense of the past that reinforces identity for future generations. You feel that with all of these little actions happening within the family, if you like, you're building the foundation of a sustainable future, because it has something to do with bringing the past, or making sure the past is simply not forgotten, and the people can have their identity as part of their resistance. The next chapter is called Record to Resist, where you'd simply go out with your camera or your mobile phone and you take pictures of everything, you record, you get into the habit of recording. This in itself is immensely useful. And I mean, just on a very, very simple level, you're getting the message out if you're able to record and share. You are countering some of the propaganda and disinformation that we get from the mainstream media. But there's more to it than that, and it's a useful chapter to read, not just from the practical point of view, but from the psychological effect of getting out there, recording the truth, and making sure that this knowledge is there, either stored or shared. The next chapter looked at going over history, if you like, reinterpreting the Palestinian history as a tradition of resistance. And so it breaks out, once again, I'm quoting here, it breaks out of something called a permanent temporality. That is, everything is temporary, it's held in limbo. Whereas if you go to the past and you say, look, you have these examples from the First Intifada, you have the example of the Great March of Return, and all of these things add up to a tradition of resistance of which the Palestinians largely can be proud. So that was interesting to read about. And he picked up literature, you know, never forgets the Kanafani story, Letter from Gaza. It's as relevant today as it was then. You know, let's remember it, let's read it again. So that's all part of the role of history, if you like, which is discussed here. Then there's a really interesting chapter on the relationship to the land. I mean, you know about this if you look at the poetry and you hear people talk of just the olive tree, for goodness sake, which is all about the way the individuals and the families connect to the land. And the idea, of course, of return is deeply sort of embedded in that. There's something called, which I don't know about actually, called place attachment theory, which is woven into this chapter. And it's actually setting up an idea of countering something which I hadn't really thought about, but is really actually important, called colonial architecture. No, sorry, colonial agriculture. I'm jumping the gun there. It's both. Colonial agriculture puts the wrong stuff in the wrong soil, quite simply. You need to go back and understand what the people who have lived there for hundreds of years knew would grow and thrive in the soil of that particular place. And the colonialists, of course, can come in, they just plant their stuff, which, you know, either just dries out and dies or simply, you know, just doesn't work. This is just another area of colonialism, which I think is important and brought out in this book. The other is architecture. That was an interesting chapter to do with reconstruction. People can come in from wherever with lots of good intentions, but actually build the wrong sort of houses. And that's a very interesting chapter to look at there. The theory, and this is brought out in another chapter too, is to go to what the extended family want. And they've got to understand, first of all, the extended family is a vital institution. And if you construct your homes with that in mind, you're at least off to a good start. I mean, there's much more than that. There's a discussion about the role of women in the planning of such architecture. Once again, fascinating area to look at. There's another separate chapter about AI, about artificial intelligence, used as a tool for restoring rights and quality of life. There's a discussion of the digital occupation of Gaza by Israel. Very interesting to look at that. And then at the various things that are undermining that a little bit and are being developed by the Palestinians themselves. Palestinian open maps, 3D printing. That became an interesting issue. I mean, you know, what you're thinking, what's the relevance? Well, go to the book and find out. It's fascinating. Then another chapter looking at cultural struggle. Now, we know that places are bombed, cultural centres are bombed. You know of the Ashtar Theatre, which was bombed in 2018. And Jonathan had set up a way of getting funds to hopefully rebuild that cultural centre. But libraries have been bombed. There's an exploration of Palestinian cinema, theatre in that chapter. And lastly, no, sorry, not lastly, just end of this section, there's a look at personal resilience, I think. You've got individuals writing about their experiences in detail of, for example, the 51 days of so-called Operation Protective Edge in 2014, the bombardment then. A very, very interesting chapter on travel restrictions, written by Yusuf Al-Jamal, who is here with us and will be talking about that, so I won't say any more. And finally, there's a section which is looking at what may happen or what the scenario might be for Gaza in 2050. And that'll be very interesting, perhaps, for us to explore and discuss later on. In the scenarios, what they look at is no solution. In other words, if nothing happens, if everything stays as it is now, how is it likely to be in 2050? The two-state solution, that was interesting to explore. And the one-state solution, that was those were the scenarios that they set themselves. So I think, Jennifer, I've given my sort of quick overview of, frankly, this fascinating book. And you can see the range of stuff, but also the focus on the Palestinian voices, which are telling us things we need to know, which are not comfortable to hear, and also inspiring us to support them in their imaginative defiance of these conditions. Jennifer Bing is with the American Friends Service Committee, and she's been there since 1989, organizing tours and conferences and workshops. She runs something called the Palestine Activism Program. And Jennifer, it'd be great if you could tell us about the origins of this book, really, and any other thoughts you have about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. And this is such a pleasure to be joined by Palestinians from Gaza. When David invited me and Yusuf to join, I was thinking that it would be mostly people joining from the UK, but what a delight to connect with people in Gaza. As David said, I work with the American Friends Service Committee, and people in Gaza probably know us as the Quakers. The Quakers were actually invited by the United Nations in 1948 to go to Gaza, given our work with refugees in Europe and our social justice work early on. We started in 1917 and are still at it today around the world. But so that began our engagement with Palestinians in Gaza. We also have a Quaker school in Ramallah that maybe some of you have visited if you've been there. That was established in the late 1800s. So Quakers and the AFSC have had this long journey alongside Palestinians. And, part of the reason why the Quakers stopped their work in Gaza to turn over the work of helping refugees, setting up the tents and clinics and schools and all that, as hundreds of thousands of people fled into Gaza in 1948 and 1949. The Quakers turned over those operations to UNRWA. So many of you know UNRWA, of course, and part of the archives of the Quaker volunteers at that time said, we need to make sure the world doesn't forget about refugees and their rights to return to their homes. After wars, refugees go back to their homes. And sadly, all of us here know that still hasn't happened decades later. So we still have an office in Gaza City and staff, Palestinian staff who work there. But we also have a program here in the United States. And as David said, I've been working here since 1989. My 3 years prior to that I was living in Palestine, and I was there during the first Intifada. And at that point was very clear that the work I needed to do was to change my government's policy and to shift American conversations and attitudes about Palestine and Palestinians. I've been doing that for decades now. And over the years, part of the work that I've focused on and AFSC is focused on is to bring people who are impacted by U.S. policy to meet Americans, so that it doesn't become just a foreign thing or a misunderstood thing, but to really see that, billions of dollars in U.S. aid to Israel, all the weapons that we send to Israel, all the diplomatic cover that we give to Israel, that has allowed the horrific continuing of occupation and displacement and bombardment and, the daily realities that we see actually worsening as we speak today. So part of our plan in 2019, early 2020, was to bring a speaking tour of actually Razan al-Najjar's family, her parents, to come to the U.S. and talk about both her killing, but also about conditions in Gaza. It was going to be the third speaking tour in several years. We also got to work with Yusuf al-Jamal in 2014 when he came to the U.S. to speak about his book, his contribution to the book, Gaza Writes Back. And then something happened called a pandemic. So the plans for a speaking tour had to be put on hold. And our small team of myself and the two other co-editors of the book, Jihad Abu Salim and Mike Merriman Lotz, decided that, let's make a book. If we're sitting at home, we can't go there. We can't bring Palestinians to the United States. So let's do an anthology. Let's bring Palestinian voices to American audiences and actually to world audiences in a book form. So I have to admit, we had never done that before. We're not, we're not seasoned journalists or writers. I've never had a book project before. I've done a lot of organizing. So we called on an editorial committee of 4 academics who had a little more experience with books and publishers. So Tarek Bakoni, Sarah Roy, Ann Lesh, and Steve Tamari joined us as an editorial team. And the 4 of them brought immense background and history and engagement with Gaza, Tarek being from Gaza, and worked with us to both select the writings for the anthology, and then to work one-on-one with the authors. And I see Mohammed Masab Abu Talha just joining us. He's also one of the contributors to this volume. So so that's how the book got started. We did an open call for abstracts to Palestinians in Gaza to answer a pretty tough question about how they envision Palestine and Gaza in the future. How will the Nakba finally end? How can we see beyond the kind of daily realities to a future? And that was an interesting question to ask people, and from what we hear from a lot of the writers, a difficult one. Yusuf can speak to that. So can Masab if he wants to join in. But I do remember that one of the contributors to the book saying, you're the first people that ever asked me that question. we're always asked about how are you living day to day? How do you, it's about our survival, or we're looking back in history. We haven't been asked about what we dream about, how we might get there. And so that's what motivated the book. We wanted to have a real diversity of voices and experiences, and David just outlined some of the topics that are in the book, but there also is this very strong personal narrative, and so that even when somebody is talking about artificial intelligence or about political scenarios or agriculture or architecture or freedom of movement, you see each of the authors really did a fabulous job, I think, of weaving in their own kind of personal story and experience. We didn't intend at the beginning to include poetry in the book, but we fell in love with Mossab's poetry, and Basman as well, his contributions, and even Rafat Al-Arir, who is a Shakespeare scholar and teaches at the Islamic University. All of them had such powerful bits of poetry to share. And I think in reading the volume, where we placed them was very intentional, to kind of give like a pause and a way to kind of reflect some of the more, in some cases, very kind of scholarly analysis. We did this, our first deadline for publishing the book was May 2021. And if my friends in Gaza can remember what that month was like, was incredibly difficult. And obviously all of us put the book aside and focused on our advocacy and organizing protests and making sure that everyone was connected at a time of great I don't even know how to just put a word to it, but horror. And we were lucky that Haymarket Books, our publisher, said, you can have more time. It's important. This book is important. These voices are important. We'll give you extra few months. So it gave us the opportunity not to nag people about, hey, we need your next draft, or can you check these footnotes, while American bombs were dropping on their heads. So we still were able to keep to some schedule, and even the editorial committee members who've worked on other books said they couldn't believe that we actually got this book out, and also with such beautiful photos and a wonderful cover by Malik Matar. All of it was really what we dreamed what we could create, and it definitely was a collective act of love. And I think what's so wonderful about it as well is the reception that the book has received. I think I fell off my chair when my friend sent me a text one Saturday saying, hey, the New York Times just reviewed your book and said only nice things. So we've been just so pleased at how many writers and scholars and activists and media outlets have been really taken with the contributions in the book. So I think that achieves some of what our goal was to bring these voices to new audiences, for people to see both the diversity and complexity and really amazing contributions that Palestinians in Gaza continue to do, so that they're not forgotten, so that they aren't only in the news when bombs are falling, but that they are heard and remembered every day. I know that's the work of your center as well, David, is keeping people aware and informed and motivated, and press on our politicians to do more to end the blockade and bring about Palestinian freedom.
What is repeated throughout the book, of course, is number one, end the blockade. I mean, everybody has to start with that as an aim. I mean, how, let's see how, but that is what you get repeated again and again, don't you? It's the most common theme. Are there any questions specifically for Jennifer relating to the book or her work? Because I want to get on to exploring the scenario idea and maybe a few points that Yusuf would like to raise. And maybe you mentioned, Jennifer, there's somebody else, there's another contributor who's joined us who may talk to us.
Yeah, Musab Abu Toha is on there. Hi, he's waving. Musab contributed the chapter about cultural institutions and contributed these beautiful poems, including the final poem in the book. He's been publishing on his own right, winning awards with his beautiful separate book of poetry. But yeah, I do want us to hear from Yusuf, who just did a speaking tour in the U.S. And also his incredible chapter that really speaks to this very another theme in the book besides ending the blockade is addressing the whole issue of freedom of movement.
Okay, thank you very much, David, and thank you, Jennifer, for introducing the project and the book and how it came to existence. So my chapter is about travel restrictions, and this is we have a lot of people from Gaza and from Nusayrat, and this is very special for me personally, since I grew up in Nusayrat refugee camp, and this is a place that has a special spot in my heart. So speaking about travel restrictions, and a lot of people in Gaza relate to this because it's part and parcel of being a Gazan or a Palestinian from Gaza. And I try to navigate the impact of travel restrictions on Palestinians, but also to imagine the future of Palestine and Gaza without travel restrictions. I highlight stories, that my family went through, not because the stories of my family are unique. No, on the contrary, they're just like, the story of every single Palestinian in Gaza. But I think people do relate to personal stories. And it's important when we talk about travel restrictions and lifting the siege in Gaza and ending, all these travel restrictions and restrictions on movement, and even the passage of Palestinian patients to hospitals in the West Bank, that we center the narrative of Nakba, that we go back to Nakba. So this is my argument. For Palestine and Gaza to live in freedom, we have to lift these restrictions and to go back to the pre-1948 settings. So I highlight the story of my family and how my grandparents were kicked out of their village called Aqar village in central Palestine in 1948 at gunpoint, and they were made refugees. My great-grandfather was killed in the village just before they had to leave, and they kept walking on the coast of the Mediterranean until they made it to Gaza, and they became refugees in Rafah, and then they moved to a Nusayrat refugee camp a few years later. And then, so it's generational. It started with my grandparents being, displaced ethnically cleansed from their village, becoming refugees, separated from each other. So our extended family was split into two parts or two groups in 1948 when Israel occupied their village. Half of the family ended up in the West Bank, the other half ended up in the Gaza Strip. That's where my father comes from, and my mother comes from the other extended part of that ended up in the West Bank. So separation and travel restrictions have always been part and parcel of this narrative of the ongoing Nakba that is happening. The siege today in Gaza is only a manifestation of this Nakba. So for 19 years, my extended family was not able to connect physically because, again, Israel was in between. When we talk about the geographic, the political division in Gaza today, for example, between Gaza and the West Bank, we should always remember the geographic division brought by Israel. So for 19 years, my extended family was not able to connect. And only in 1967, when Israel, quote unquote, finished the job and occupied the West Bank and Gaza, ironically, my family was able to physically connect under occupation, under military occupation. And that's when my father was able to make a visit to his extended family in the West Bank. And that's when he met my mother and they got married. But then moving to Gaza for my mother was another struggle because she had to change her ID, and we have different systems of IDs for Palestinians living in Gaza, Palestinians living in the West Bank, and Palestinians living in Jerusalem, but also Palestinians who live in historic Palestine who have Israeli passports. So the worst type of these IDs is the Gaza ID, and my mother had to change her address from the West Bank, from Beit Sahur and Bethlehem, where she was born, to Gaza. And she was not aware of the implications. It took her 12 years from 2000 when the second Palestinian Intifada broke out until 2012, when she was able to get a permit to see her own family who live an hour away from my Gaza refugee camp. And her parents passed away in 2003, 2008. She was not able to get a permit to participate in the funeral procession because an Israeli officer decided she's a security threat, or he was bold enough not to issue a permit. Only when the Israeli Supreme Court intervened and got involved after an Israeli human rights organization called Gisha petitioned on her behalf in 2012, was she able to get a permit, a 4-day permit to visit her own hometown. And she stayed there for 32 days, a day for each year she spent away from her family in Gaza. But according to Israeli rules, she overstayed in the West Bank because she violated the terms of the permit that was given to her. And again, there are thousands of families who are split by the occupation, who live in Gaza and the West Bank, and they cannot see each other. Sometimes it takes years and years, 20 years, 25 years. People, Palestinians, cannot connect physically, see each other because of this, system of collective punishments, of permits to separate the Palestinian people and prevent them from connecting with each other, including families and patients. So it's not limited only to families, but also students and patients, and many, people who do not travel for the sake of having fun, but people who travel because they need to travel, like they have life-threatening diseases. For example, cancer patients are collectively punished in Gaza, where in some cases Israel gives a permit to cancer patients to have the first chemotherapy session, but not the second one. They blackmail them into collaboration. And in many cases, cancer patients never get these permits. So I narrate these stories so that people connect to them. And again, it's not the story of my mother only, but also throughout the first Palestinian Intifada, and many Palestinians today join us from Gaza. They can relate to these experiences of humiliating Palestinians. For example, asking them to collect the dirt, or to remove a Palestinian flag, or just simply to dance one day. So to go also back to 1948 and before 1948, I grew up in Block A, which used to be a British prison during the First World War. So a prison run by the Allied forces. And it's called Kalabosh. It comes from the Egyptian accent, from a word that has to do with chains. It's a Turkish word. It means chains, kalabcha, and it's used in Arabic. And so growing up in what used to be a prison, literally, and the way in and out of the neighborhood or the community, refugee community, was actually the gate of the prison. And again, growing up there in the biggest open air prison in the world, Gaza, and having all these, drones, surveillance systems. I do remember growing up in Gaza as a child and getting in and out of the refugee community in Block A, where we live. Israeli soldiers always patrolling the entrance of the refugee community and humiliating people, searching their belongings. And one time my father was going back from his daily job in Israel in the first Intifada, and he was stopped by these soldiers, trigger-happy soldiers, armed to the teeth, teenagers, and they wanted to have some fun. So on the opposite side of the entrance, there was a cafe filled with people who were sipping some coffee and listening to some classic Arabic music, and they asked him to dance in front of everyone. That was their way of humiliating him. And that's why I say it's generational. It started with my grandfather, grandparents, and then my father, and now like my generation, and then my nephews and nieces are going through the same experience. And he had no option but to agree to their demands. Otherwise, they would like break his bones, torture him, shoot him, kill him. God knows what's going to happen. But he was smart enough. So he said, if you need me to dance, you have to clap for me. So they agreed, and they put their guns aside and they started clapping for him. And he picked up his slippers, shoes, and he ran away. He disappeared in the horizon. There was an orange grove nearby. And playing there as a child, he knew the place very well. So he climbed a very high tree and he hid there. And they kept looking for him, and people started laughing at them. So they became the joke of the refugee camp. So instead of making fun of my dad made fun of them. And again, there were all types of rumors about his fate. Some people said he was shot. Some people said he was tortured. Some people said he was injured. He was killed. So you can imagine the trauma, generational trauma of having to live with this situation or these news. Again, he hid there, and there was no communication at the time. He was not able to communicate with his family, but he had a very good gift. His voice. He made the call for prayer when it was sunset time. He went to a nearby mosque, and he made the call for prayer, and that's how he communicated with his family at the time. Tell them, I am alive and kicking. And again, as I mentioned, the experience of Palestinian patients, my sister was an UNRWA teacher. In 2007, she needed a minor surgery that was not available in Gaza due to the siege, and she applied for an Israeli permit. She was at the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in the middle area of Gaza, and after waiting for 1 week at the hospital, she got a rejection. So the Rafah crossing was the only way out of Gaza and was shut down. The Rafah crossing connects Gaza with Egypt. And when it was open and she was allowed to go out, it was too late for her. Once she made it to Cairo, she had the surgery, and her body was too fragile to handle the surgery, and she lost her life. And she was newly married, and young with great potential, working as a teacher for UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees. And even bringing her body back to Gaza was a struggle because the border was shut down. So my father would bring her body in an ambulance from Al-Arish city, which is 50 miles away from Gaza, in the summer, in June 2007. And he would be sent back for 2 days. And on the third day, he was allowed to enter Gaza. So I narrate these stories it's very tragic to even speak about these stories every time and then, especially that these are personal stories. But again, people do relate to personal stories. Why do I narrate these stories in the book? Because one, I want to bring about change, and I want to also imagine the future of Gaza and Palestine without these travel restrictions. And I argue that it's doable and possible to connect Gaza with the rest of the world, with Palestine, even to challenge these travel restrictions. Unfortunately, I can see more people from my extended family outside Palestine, but not in Palestine, in Turkey, in the US, in Europe, but not in Palestine. I was able to see a good number of my West Bank family in Jordan, not in the West Bank, in 2014. And to imagine like the implications of being away from family for a long time, my aunt was not able to recognize me. She lives in the UAE and she hasn't seen me for the past 20 years. I was a little child when we met for the last time. She kept, guessing and giving wrong names of people in my family, thinking that I was one of them. And again, it's generational because it's happening now. I have been outside Gaza for 6 years now doing my PhD, and I haven't seen my nephews and nieces and family for the past 6 years. So the argument is that ending travel restrictions is possible and doable by challenging these travel restrictions, seeing Palestinians or family members outside Palestine probably. But again, this is not a permanent solution. It's a temporary solution to these travel restrictions. The solution should include our ability to move freely between Gaza and anywhere in Palestine without restrictions. Patients should not even have to, apply for permits to have medical care. People in Gaza should have an independent health system, and this system of permits should be removed altogether. We do not need it. And again, building what's the word, zone, I'm trying to remember the word in English, buffer zones in Gaza. We do not need them. I mean, Gaza, the overall space of Gaza has been shrinking over the time. In 1950, Gaza was almost 500 kilometers. And then Israel chopped almost 150 kilometers of Gaza's space and land and designated it as a buffer zone. And over time, non-militarized zone. And over time, this unmilitarized zone was annexed into Israel. And the population of Gaza has tripled overnight in 1948. No one talks about the natural growth of Palestinians in Gaza, for example, today. In 1948, the population of Gaza was only 100,000. A few weeks later, following the huge influx of Palestinian refugees, it became 300,000 Palestinians. Today, it's 2.2 million Palestinians. And in 10 years, it will become 3 million. No one talks about the future of Gaza, imagining, how can we survive there? How can we create jobs? Use architecture, agriculture, artificial intelligence to improve our lives. Because, the UN said Gaza will be unlivable by 2020. It's already 2022. And there are no solutions. The aquifer has been damaged greatly because of Israeli practices and because of, the huge demand by Palestinians and limited supply, but no one talks about it. Israel is destroying Gaza's power plant over and over again, and also the only sewage desalination facility was destroyed. Both of them are located in Nusayrat. And sewage has always been, pumped into the Mediterranean. So we need to think of sustainable solutions in terms of freedom of movement to connect Gaza with the West Bank, build a train, a tunnel, but also connect Gaza with the rest of Palestine. Because when we talk about Gaza, it's not an issue of Gaza and the West Bank only. It's an issue of Palestinian refugees. And this is the message of the Great March of Return that came out of Gaza. So we have to find solutions that go beyond the narrative two-state solution, but also emphasize the fact that Palestinians are one collective and have one identity, and that should be united as a nation. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating, and need to emphasize a point that you made, which is, of course, that a lot of these ideas and thoughts come from the power of the personal stories, which are in the book. Yours, especially, I think what you convey in your chapter is the psychological impact of separation. I think it was your mother who felt that intensely, not being able to physically reach people on the other side. Very important, thank you. Now, I see somebody's hand up. I don't think I know this person. It's Ben Ali. Is this somebody you know, Jennifer?
Ibtisam? I don't know.
No? Okay, I wonder if he's from Gaza.
She, probably.
Sorry. And there's also the poet and the founder of the Edward Said Library in Gaza, Musab, who we did have. There he is. Two things, Musab. I wonder whether you would like to say anything, maybe based on your chapter, or read a poem, or anything really. It's just nice to have you here. And can you unmute, or is that something?
Yeah.
Okay, you're all right.
Good evening, everyone. I'm currently in California. I'm just traveling. I was in Syracuse, upstate in New York. If my friend Saeed Al-Kahlout, who is based in Gaza, sent me the link. I was not aware of this webinar. So I'm glad to be here. And thank you, Yusuf, for your contribution and the stories you shared with us in the book and also here. And thank you, Jennifer. I listened to what Yusuf just told everyone about the stories of the cruel restrictions imposed on everyone in Gaza and also in the West Bank, but especially in Gaza, because as everyone knows, there are only two border crossings, the one with Rafah and the one between Gaza and Israel called Erez, which neither of the two are controlled by the Palestinians. I want to share with you a very quick story of mine. Before I came here to the US this last August, I applied for a visa interview at the American embassy in Jerusalem. So I applied for a permit just 1 month before the appointment, and weirdly, I got a call from the Palestinian Coordination Office in Gaza saying that I have a permit to go to Jerusalem the next day. So I was very excited about it because that was the first time I get such a permit. So I hurried the next morning to the Palestinian side of the Erez crossing, and I got that permit, which had my name in Hebrew and in Arabic, and also my photo. So I went on to the Israeli side of the Erez crossing. So there were about 15 going to the embassy in Jerusalem that day. I was one of them. So by the way, it was my first time seeing an Israeli in my whole life. So it's very strange that you are not able to see the people who are bringing death and wounds to your people, and who have expelled your ancestors from their land. So it was the first time for me to see someone from Israel. So 10 of the 14 people were cleared to go. They went to the other side of the Erez crossing. 4 of them, including me, were asked to wait until they are called for. So I waited for about 10 minutes, and then the Israeli staff called for 3 of the 4 to take their paper and go on to the next side. Except for me, the Palestinian man who usually accompanies Palestinians on their journey to Jerusalem told me, Mus'ab, come. So I went on, and he told me, they are not going to let you in. So you would have to return to Gaza. So I was sent back to Gaza. I was unable to go on to have my visa interview the same day. So I had to reschedule my visa interview. And so in Gaza, in order to go to Jerusalem, you have to apply 1 month before your appointment. So they would have to do some research on you. So I did that for the second time, but the second time, no one called me, and I looked up my name on the website of the Palestinian Coordination Office, and it says rejected. So I also missed my appointment for the second time, and then I had to go to Egypt and have my interview there. It was a long and tortuous journey. That was one of the stories that are in line with Yusuf's topic. You asked me to read one of my poems. So I have my book, luckily, with me here, Things You May Find Hidden in My Ear, which was published this April by City Lights in San Francisco. Okay, so the first poem in my collection is called Palestine AZ. So for each letter in the English alphabet, I created my own dictionary. So A is for apple, B for book, let's say. So I wrote what every word that I picked, that I chose, meant to me. So I will read just for the first 5 letters, A, B, C, D. Palestine, AZ. A, an apple that fell from the table on a dark evening when man-made lightning flashed through the kitchen, the streets, and the sky, rattling the cupboards and breaking the dishes. Am is the linking verb that follows I in the present tense, when I am no longer present, when I am shattered. B, a book that doesn't mention my language or my country, and has maps of every place except for my birthplace, as if I were an illegitimate child on Mother Earth. Borders are those invented lines drawn with ash on maps and sewn into the ground by bullets. C, Gaza is a city where tourists gather to take photos next to destroyed buildings or graveyards. A country that that exists only in my mind. Its flag has no room to fly freely, but there is a space on the coffins of my countrymen. D, Dar means house. My grandparents left their house behind in 1948 near Jaffa Beach. A tree my father told me about stood in the front yard. Dreams of children and their parents of listening to songs or watching plays at Al-Mishal Cultural Center. Israel destroyed it in August 2018. I hate August, but the plays are still performed in Gaza. Gaza is the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I see Najwa? You've got your hand up. If it's, would you like to speak first, though, because I don't know where you're from or who you are, I'm afraid. No? No, that's not connecting at the moment. Najwa, you've got your hand up.
Actually, after listening of the overview you gave about this book, I feel myself a big loser not contributing in this book and not knowing about the project itself. And I would like to say that during working on this book, I was with 34 translators working on translating another book talking about 48 Palestinian narratives. And I was one of the translators and the editors of the book. And I told you before that the book is about to be in the light from Inner Child Press House in Pennsylvania. And actually, I feel very sorry not contributing in this book. And I would like to have a copy soon to read all the stories that my friends and colleagues and brothers, sisters contributed and narrated in this book. One more important thing I would like to say that after making statistics about the translated literature of the Palestinian literature, it was only 40% of the Palestinian literature from Nakba till 2020, only 40% of the whole Palestinian Arabic literature was translated into English. And this is a very, let's say, bad percentage for us as educators and as cultural and as writers and as people who masters the other language. And I'm so happy that some other people are trying to make projects rather than Palestinians, of course, to let the whole world know the story and let the whole world know what is going on land in Palestine. Here in Germany, it's very, very bad to know that the majority of German people do not know anything about the real thing we're suffering on land day by day in Gaza, especially in Gaza. When I made the fellow speech at the Schloss Solitude Academy last June, I listed the misery of my journey to Germany in numbers. And one of the numbers was three months of waiting for my name to be listed on the travel lists, the normal one. Of course, if you have a visa and you have a fellowship, it's not a big deal for you. It's not an urgent thing for you. It's not a matter of life and death for you just to let you go out of the borders of Gaza. Another one was that I passed through 16 checkpoints just from the borders of Rafah to pass Sinai. 16 checkpoints you have to, as a Palestinian person, you have to be checked 16 times, and your bags have to be opened on the garbage 16 times. And these details, though they don't have blood, they don't have shreds, they don't have airstrikes, I felt the audience who gathered to attend the festival of the Academy, I felt them very sad, feeling the inhumanity that people are exposed to in Gaza. And I'm so happy that we are in our, let's say, little effort we do to document and to write our stories and our miseries. We're doing a great thing just to let the whole world know what is going on in Gaza. That's it. I would like just to say another thing about a period of time where the checkpoints were inside Gaza Strip. And this is a personal story of mine. When I used to go to university from the south of Gaza to the north of Gaza, the universities, the main universities were there. And I had to pass through 3 checkpoints every day. One day, and I documented this in a story, I spent 12 hours between 2 checkpoints, where you pass from the north to the south of Gaza you can travel within just 45 minutes. And between these two checkpoints, I spent 12 hours waiting for the checkpoint or the finger of the soldier just to point to the group of cars just to pass this checkpoint. And I wrote this in a story. It's not a kind of let's say narration thing. It's a kind of literary thing, and my way of writing is a kind of symbolic. And while translating, I found out that I have to clear the symbols I used to write and publish. And I would like to clear more and to put details on my way of writing, just to clear the miseries we are living as Palestinian people. Thank you so much for inviting me for this webinar. I'm so happy to have you and to listen to all the people here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Najwa. That was a most useful, I think, contribution and moving. And do remember, everybody really, that if you want to connect with each other, go into the chat. I can already see Jennifer's message to Najwa. Use this as an opportunity to find connections with people here so that you can contact them later.
Of course. Yeah, I'm so happy for this.
And what I'd like to do now, just to move on to the, as it were, final part of the book. The final section is, as I said before, a set of scenarios. What is Gaza going to be like in 2050? Now, of course, one of the things that you've got to have the strength to do is to actually, if you're living in Gaza, feel you can think that far ahead instead of just thinking of how am I going to get through the day.
Yeah.
But it therefore becomes a very important, I think, psychological exercise to think, what is this place going to be like in 2050? And I wondered whether there were any people in Gaza who would like to respond to that question. Is there anybody here who would like to do that? Miss Mohammed, where are you?
Hi, David.
Yes. Have you thought about that question at all? What's Gaza going to be like in 2050?
It's a difficult question. First of all, I want to thank you, Jennifer and Yusuf and Sohaib and Najwa, of course. We need more people, you know, especially with art. They can open more opportunity to express their story and their feeling and the reality for the Palestinian. Because I agree with David, as mentioned, like, you know, personal story, as also myself, when I published my personal story called Journey Through Thorns, still till today people ask and read it. So it gives like what it looks like to be a refugee and cross generation. So every Palestinian, every house has a story. And unfortunately, it's a painful story, but it's already has a combination of pain and resilience. So that's, you can find it. So that's what we have, hope, a little hope for things. So for the point of about how it looks for Gaza in 2050, I don't think, from what I can see, look for the politics in Israel. Last year or last government, now they are more radical, more extremist. Even some, I read some Israeli newspaper, some of the Israeli, they are quite scared from what will happen, and some of them already moved out because they thought this will bring more problem and conflict with the Palestinian and with the Arabs, and not just with the Middle East, with the people who have freedom and dignity and justice. So what is going on, it doesn't look like will be something easy, but the more they could do the Israeli side, everyone knows now, especially in the United States. I think the growth of especially young people to become interested to know what's the story of the Palestinian. And that's really from last attack and invasion in Gaza, that we can feel. Maybe government could be look for 2050, not that much change from the government, but we hope more from ordinary people, like people who are here from Europe and from the United States. They will become more supporting and more solidarity for the Palestinian, and that's our hope. Even the government in Ramallah, they used to say this, and they are really very patient. Hopefully that's something's. Hopefully that's could be more hopeful, but the reality on the ground doesn't tell more. So more suffering is coming. That's what we feel. Yeah.
Could I ask Mohammed for you to put that question in Arabic to the people we've got from Gaza, Eman and others?
Yeah.
Thank you.
You want to write or just say this? I can write it in the chat also. So David asked بيسأل سؤال ماذا تعتقدون في 2050 كيف بدها تكون الدنيا خاصة بالنسبة لفلسطين والفلسطينيين في غزة وفي كل مكان في فلسطين. فهذا السؤال وبكتبه برضو على الشات يعني أساس لو في حد من الموجودين يعني أساس يفهم السؤال لو حب يرد بالعربي أو بالإنجليزي ممكن يترجم. شكرا ديفيد. Thank you.
We get a response. They can reply in Arabic, of course, and then we can hear the translation. Would anybody? Yes.
Israel governments can give good answer for this question because if they deal with Gaza people here as a people under occupation and have the right for life, all the right of life, the right of therapy, the right of children play, and give this right for our. I can imagine that life is be good here, but people here can't imagine how their life can be in 2015 because situation is difficulty and come difficulty all the time.
Thank you, Dr. Said. You raise a very good point about human rights, and it reminds me of Garda Kami's. I think you all know who I mean by Garda Kami. Suggestion that any campaign for the Palestinians should be founded on human rights. Yeah. And just from that, you will be able to reach the ears of people in the West and possibly make some progress. This is where talk of, one state, two state solution becomes all a bit futile, but human rights, putting those rights, at the center of your campaign is probably the way forward. Now, thank you. Nisreen,
yes,
would you like to? Yes, thank you.
You are asking about 2050, yes? 2050, yes. Reading the history of people all around the world, Palestine will be free, Gaza will be free. We are not looking for less than that. Thank you.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you. Any other comments from Gaza? Allah or Eman, do they want to say anything? Jennifer, what about this point about 2050? how did you feel about the scenarios and what was sort of said there? It seemed to really put the kibosh on the two-state solution, there's so-called. I mean, that looked absolutely disastrous.
Well, it's no secret to anybody on this call, I think, given facts on the ground and the reckless pursuit of annexation and colonization that is going unchecked. Best Man Al-Darawi wrote that chapter where he was, kind of envisioning. I mean, it's a tough question to think that far ahead, and he just kind of played through like, well, what would this end up? And his point of view was landing on a one state where equality and justice and dignity was available for all people. So I think that he's not the only one that has called for that kind of future. And Nasreen just added her perspective as well. So yeah, we're just put it out there. It's not for us as Americans to determine that. It's up to Palestinians themselves to, but they do need our support, and they do need our governments to get out of the way and stop funding the continual bombardment and occupation and blockade and all of that. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And we've got Abdul Jalil from Nur Al Marifa School, the director of the school itself. It's good to see you here. Now, Mohammed, you can help us here maybe, but Abdul Jalil, what would you like to say?
تفضل أبو أحمد. أستاذ عبد الجليل سمعنا؟
نعم سامعك، كيف حالكم؟ إن شاء الله بخير.
تفضل. الحمد لله بخير.
الحمد لله رب العالمين. يعني أنا سعيد جدا بسماع أصواتكم ومشاهدة وجوهكم الطيبة والنيرة يعني في موضوع مهم، وهذا الموضوع يعني الذي يخص القضية الفلسطينية، وخاصة نتحدث يعني عن أصدقاء مساندين للقضية الفلسطينية كما رأيتهم في زيارتي الأخيرة إلى لندن من خلال جلوسي مع الصديق الحبيب لفلسطين السيد ديفيد، هذا الرجل الذي أحببته، وكما أحببت الدكتور محمد، وأيضا باقي أعضاء اللي هو الBTC في لندن. لذلك يعني أود أن أنوه على قضية مهمة جدا، أن يعني قطاع غزة يعيش في محن متعددة، وخاصة عندما أشاهد الكثير من أبناء شعبنا في قطاع غزة يكسوهم مشاكل كثيرة، منها على سبيل المثال الضغط النفسي والحياة الغير اعتيادية من خلال المعاناة اليومية التي يعيشها أبناء شعبنا في قطاع غزة. لذلك هذه الضغوطات النفسية التي نشعر بها جميعا ونتحدث فيها في محافل كثيرة. لذلك هذه المحافل يعني الحياة اليومية، وخاصة عندما يعني أنا شاهدت اللي هي الحياة سواء كان في الأردن، سواء كان في السعودية، سواء كان أيضا في بريطانيا. يعني أنا شعرت عندما مكثت في بريطانيا أو في الأردن أو في السعودية، تمام، يختلف اختلاف كبير. أنت تعيش من الممكن فقط اللي هي غربة الوطن، لكن أن تعيش في قطاع غزة غربة الوطن وغربة القهر، من خلال القهر اليومي، من خلال القهر القسري الذي نعيشه نحن، يعني نقول عن أنفسنا مثقفين، سواء في بيوتنا في ضغط، أيضا في العمل الذي نعمل به هناك ضغوطات كبيرة. لذلك يعني هناك لو أردنا أن نعمل على حلول، وضع حلول لهذه الضغوطات النفسية التي يعيشها أبناء قطاع غزة، سواء الكبار أو الصغار. يعني نحن نعمل في مجال التربية والتعليم، نجد أن أطفالنا إلى أين ذاهبون في مدارسهم؟ لذلك الكل يعني في بعض الأمور غير مهيئة، لأن نعيش في قضايا يعني بسموها نفسية وتحت ضغوطات كبيرة جدا، سواء هذه الضغوطات تختلف يعني من وقت لآخر.
Okay, can we cope with just what we've heard, Mohammed, and because some people will have to leave soon, if that's okay.
Okay, just to summarize, شكرا أستاذ عبد الجليل أبو أحمد. Just to summarize what Abdul Jalil said, he was very pleased and happy to come here in the UK and to see David and the team of PTC, Palestine Trauma Center in London. He was very happy and pleased and welcomed, and he really appreciated to see this, and he loved the way of the trustees of PTC in London look after and take care of the people in Palestine, especially in Gaza, and also he felt very, very warm and very welcome. So Ustaz Abdul Jalil, he mentioned to live in Gaza Strip, it's a huge difficulties, and there's lots of stresses and hardship, and this is daily, every day. The people, they will see this, as everyone mentioned this. But he's from Abdul Jalil, he just come to UK, and he visit also Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Egypt and Gaza. So he has a quite good tour, and he saw the differences and the difference of the lifestyle. So in these countries is okay, but when he come back to Gaza, he felt like it's like living in a hell. It's too much suffering, and that is big. And it looks like, you know, for us to live outside as a Palestinian, you feel like, okay, there's some, you know, away or from your country, but to live in your country, you feel like you are great hardship, and also you suffer from the tragedy which happening every day there. So it's, you feel like you are there in Gaza, for example, but you feel you are a strange feeling, like you can't cope with what you are living there in Gaza. So also he just mentioned the children in the schools. It's also part of these difficulties. So everywhere you look, you will find some difficulties in Gaza, whether it's schools or society or charities or something like that.
Well, I'd like to thank Abdul Jalil for that contribution, and to say how pleased we were to see him in London. Of course, if you leave Gaza and then come back, you have these awful comparisons, as he said. We should be drawing to a close now. Is there anything that anybody would like to ask or say, perhaps in response to what they've heard so far, or make any other comment? Gesine?
Yeah, just listening to the stories and then the possible projections forward into the future of Gaza. I remember, a report from the United Nations came up in my mind that was written in 2012, where it was predicted that Gaza becomes an uninhabitable place in 8 years' time. due to water pollution, waterborne disease, unemployment rate, mental health issues, chronic disease, and so on and so on. And putting that into the context of the Gazans' survival, it's remarkable because we are in 2022, and there they struggle on and persevere. I just wanted to, that thought was just on my mind in a really big way, that they're officially living in a place on the planet that is deemed uninhabitable.
Yes, that's right. Anybody else? Anything from anybody else? Jonathan, yes. Can you unmute, Jonathan?
Can you?
That's it. No. Can you unmute again? Can I have a go at unmuting?
Can you hear me?
Now you can be heard, yes.
Okay. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. My life seems to be beset with technical difficulties, but it's so good to hear about the book. Thank you for the digest that you've given of it, David. And also thank you to the people who have talked so passionately, who have been contributors to the book. And well done, Jennifer and those Quakers, for getting the publication together. It sounds a remarkable book and I'm looking forward to reading it. I'm just thinking about the projections for 2050 and the feeling that I think I should insist on, which reflects something that Jennifer said at the beginning of her talk to us today, and that is that we live in an interconnected world, and Gaza will change, but we have to change. We, the world, will change, and Gaza and Israel and Palestine will change with it. And because we, I think, in the West are living at the end of this dreadful regime. And at the end of this dreadful regime, it's even more dreadful. And one of the dreadful aspects of it is what's happening in Palestine. And I just want to emphasize the need to look at the world as one place, and Gaza and Palestine is a part of our world. And that world has to change. We have to change our governments, not just from the point of view of which party is ruling. We have to change the very moral structure of our society. And for me, Palestine and my relationship to Palestinians is always a provocation and an inspiration to look about me at changing the society of which I'm a part. And that's what I would like to kind of contribute to this vision of the future, because I agree that Palestinians will be free and we will be free with Palestinians, because we must go through the process of freeing our own societies of this dreadful imperial system that we've developed, of which the Palestinians are now the most recent sufferers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Anybody else? I will end with a poem. I think Mossab's gone. And then perhaps maybe a last word from you, Jennifer, you're still here. The poem is A Rose Shoulders Up. Don't ever be surprised to see a rose shoulder up among the ruins of the house. This is how we survived. And that's at the end of the book. Jennifer, any last word?
Well, thank you, everyone, for coming today after the World Cup sad news. But I'm just so pleased to connect with all of you. And, we're doing our best here in the United States to shift the discourse and try to hold people accountable for all the suffering that our government continues to fund and support in Palestine and other parts of the world. But it's just so wonderful to share light in Gaza with you. And hopefully these writings will inspire you to talk to people who haven't read about Gaza, or even other Palestinians who may not be as connected as they should be to the realities there. So I hope that the book will do that for everyone, and especially everyone in Gaza. Thank you for spending some of your evening with me, and Yusuf, it's always a pleasure to connect with you and hear your stories. Thank you for sharing the difficult stories again and again.
And can I just ask Yusuf, because let's the last voice be from someone born in Gaza. Yusuf, anything?
I would like to end with a hopeful note. Palestinian novelist Ibrahim Nasrallah said in one of his novels that after all these years under occupation, we are still beautiful, as if we live above occupation, not under it. And I think we should have this spirit that we'll be free soon. We shouldn't wait until 2050 to be free, of course. And a lot of things have taken place in the past 5 years. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem and other human rights organizations describing Israel's regime as an apartheid regime, the Great March of Return. I mean, if we think about the population of Gaza and the natural growth of the population of Gaza, the occupation and apartheid system as unsustainable, it's not going to last for too long. When and how, we don't know. But for sure, we do know, based on the experience of other people, as one of my friends today here said, we'll be free. We will get our freedom. We will live and connect as one nation sooner than later. The price might be high, but again, the freedom itself is the gift. And I think the Palestinian people will continue to fight for their freedom, regardless of how bad it gets on the ground.
Ma'as-salama.
As-salam. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.